really glad that Thank you for that, David. Very happy that everyone could make it. And let's get this kicked off. Hi, my name is Floor. I'm one of the organizers of this Postgres Extension Ecosystem Mini Summits, which is a series of free and online mini summits leading up to the session at the Postgres Development Conference this May 13 through 16 in Montreal. Other organizers are here on the call as well. David from Tembo, Yuri from Onigress, and Keith from Crunchy Data. Today is the first of 5 streams, and we have David here also talk to us, at us about the state of the extension ecosystem, and no doubt also share some updates from PGXN land. This stream and the closed captions that we'll bake into the recording after this event is over, when we upload it to YouTube, is supported by the PostgreSQL Development Conference and their gold level sponsors, Google, AWS, Huawei, Microsoft, and also my employer, EDB. Next in this series, we'll have Peter Eisentraut talk about implementing an extension search path. We'll have Christoph Berg tell us about apt extension packaging. We'll have a few users of extensions join us to tell us how they pick and choose extensions and tooling. And in May, we'll have Gabriella Bartolino talk to us about extension management in cloud native PG. But that's all to come still. And today we're going to hear from David. So without further ado, David, I think you can take over this screen and share your insights.
Indeed. Thank you so much. So I wanted to give a brief update on the state of the Postgres extension ecosystem, the past, present, and future. And my name is David Wheeler. I am a principal architect at Tembo. I created PGXN. A little bit of my past coming back. I also created Sketch, which I talked about in the previous session, the Postgres Meetup for All, which just finished. But last year we created the extension summit at pgconf.dev and had these mini talks leading up to it. I think it went well, so we're bringing it back. So let's give a brief history of extensions in PostgreSQL. It's quite long, actually. There were originally 2 approaches back in the day. You could use shared preload libraries to have it preload dynamic shareable libraries into the main process. And then you could do pure SQL stuff including procedural languages like PL-Perl and PL-Tcl and such. And there were a few intrepid early adopters, including PostGIS, BioPostgres, PLR, PL-Proxy, and PGTAP, who all made it work. Let's see here. Yes. Record questions. Yeah, thank you, Flora. Right. So, beginning of Postgres 9.1, Dimitri Fontaine added support for explicit support for extensions in Postgres core itself. The key features included the ability to compile and install extensions. This is, again, pure SQL and shared libraries. There are create, update, and drop extension commands in SQL that you can use to add extensions to a database, upgrade them to new versions, and to remove them. And then PG dump and PG restore support so that extensions could be considered a single bundle to be backed up and restored without all their individual objects being included as part of the backup and restore. So back then, a number of us, myself included, saw this as an opportunity to have kind of an extensibility of Postgres itself be a fundamental part of the community and see distribution. I was a long-time user of Perl and used CPAN, and I thought, oh, we had something like CPAN for Postgres. So I proposed the PGXN, the PostgreSQL Extension Network, back in 2010. The idea was to do distribution of source code. You would register namespaces for your extensions. There was discovery, there'd be a website for search, documentation published. It would be nice to find stuff, tags to help you find different kinds of objects in there, and to support installation through a command line interface, the compile and install stuff that Postgres itself provides using pgxs and configure. Flora, I'll leave it to you to interrupt me if the chat questions have come up. This is what PGXN looks like today. It was launched in 2011. And there's a command line client. There's this website. There's an API. There's a registry you can upload your extensions to. The most recent one was PG Task a day or so ago. So in the interim, since that came out in 2011, 2012, uh, the cloud providers have come into their own with Postgres, but their support for extensions tends to be rather limited. So for non-core extension counts, as of yesterday, I was looking at them. Azure provides 38 extensions. GCP provides 44 extensions, and AWS 51. These are the third-party extensions that don't come with Postgres and its contrib itself. Meanwhile, PGXN has 420 extensions available to download, compile, and build and install. And a website, just a GitHub project that tracks random extensions on the internet, which is pretty comprehensive, but not completely comprehensive. I've noticed now and then things missing from it. It has almost 1,200 extensions listed. So the question is, why is the support not more broad? Why is it not that there are 1,000 extensions available in every one of these systems? And this has been a fairly common question that's come up in the last couple of years. So a number of new projects have come to try to fill in the gaps. One is trusted language extensions. They wanted to make it easier to distribute extensions without having the dynamic shared library support by adding additional features in the database itself. The idea was to empower app developers to make it easy to install extensions via SQL functions rather than having to access the file system of the database service system itself. It can be portable, so there's no compilation required. It hooks into the create extension command transparently, supports custom data types, and there have been plans for foreign data wrappers and background workers. I'm not sure how that's progressed in the past year. This was the TLE's, PGTLE extension itself was created by AWS and Supabase. Another recent entrance in tooling for extensions is PGRX, which is native Rust extensions in Postgres. These are, you build dynamic shared libraries, but you write them all in pure Rust. The API for PGRX provides full access to Postgres features, and so it provides typical kind of developer-friendly tooling that Rust developers are used to. There's been a lot of community excitement the last couple of years around PGRX, and it remains under active development. Version 0.13.0 just came out a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, and that's sponsored and run out of the PG Central Foundation. There have also been a couple of several new registries that have come up to try to fill the gap and make extensions available, and they have emphasized different things than what PGXN emphasized. One was ease of use. So for example, here PGXN says like it should be really easy to install a client in a single command, and then it installs something, and then it downloads and installs a binary version of your extensions. Another was platform neutrality. They wanted to do, again, binary distribution and support multiple different platforms, and they would know what platform to install for a given one. They provide stats. PGXN doesn't provide any stats, but some of them are like, here's how many downloads we had, how many in the last 180 days. And curation. Trunk is another one of these from my employer Tempo, and they do categorization of all the extensions that are on Trunk, which is around 230 now. No, it's a lot. Anyway, and quite a few people have come forward to say, we don't necessarily use Trunk to install extensions, but we use them to find them because these categories are really helpful for people to figure out where to, what sorts of things are even available and an option for them to use. So here's the state of the ecosystem as I see it today. There have been some lost opportunities from the initial excitement of around 2010. Extensions remain difficult to find and discover. Some are on PGXN, some are on GitHub, some are on Trunk, some are on GitLab. There's no like one place to go to find them all. They remain underdocumented and difficult to understand. It takes effort for developers to write documentation for their extensions, and a lot of them aren't able to. Some of them do write the documentation, but they might be in a format that something like PGXN doesn't understand, so it's difficult to find. The maturity of extensions can be difficult to engage. So if you look at that list of 1,200 extensions on GitHub, it's like, well, okay, so there are extensions there, but which ones are the good ones? Which ones do people care about? And that page in particular has a list of like, here's how many have this many stars and have that many stars, but that's like the only metric they have for that. They're difficult to configure and install. This is something like TLE really tried to solve, but the uptake on TLE has not been great so far. Um, and it doesn't support all the use cases. There are a lot of use cases where you need to be able to access the internal APIs of Postgres itself, which means compiling stuff into shared libraries and running them in C or Rust or a couple of other compiled languages. And that makes them difficult to configure and install. You have to know, okay, which build system do I use? Do I install the tooling? How do I install it and configure it? What dependencies does it have? Yada, yada, yada. And so there's no comprehensive binary packaging. The Postgres community's own packaging systems for Linux, apt, and Yum do a remarkably good job of extensions. They probably have more extensions packaged for those platforms than any of the others. And so if they have the extension you need and you're using the PGDG uh, repositories, then this stuff is there. But even those are still like a fraction of all the potential available extensions that are out there. Dependency management can be pretty painful. As I said, it's difficult to know what you need to install. I was messing around yesterday with the PGSQL HTTP uh, extension, which is a great extension that just basically uses libcurl. And I thought, oh, maybe I can build a package that includes libcurl as part of it. But then I realized, well, libcurl depends on other packages, other dynamic libraries. So I'd have to figure out what all those are to gather them all together. A lot of that goes away if you use a system like apt or Yum. But if you don't, or you just want to install stuff on your Mac, it's much more difficult, or Windows. And so the centralized source distribution, I think we found is insufficient. Even if all the extensions were available on PGXN, not everybody has the wherewithal or the expertise to be able to find what they need, download it, compile it, build it. You don't want to have a compiler on your production system, so you don't want to be installing stuff and building stuff from source in your production system. So then you have to get to the business of building your own packages for that sort of thing. And it's a whole thing. So in this state of the extensions ecosystem, we see new opportunities. So one of the ones I've been working on for the past year is just calling PGXN V2. It's made possible by my employer, Tembo, currently. The idea was to consider the emerging patterns, some of which we talked about here with new registries and new ways of building building and releasing and developing extensions, and to figure out where the deficiencies are, and to engage deeply with the community to work up potential solutions to those, and to design and implement a new architecture. And the idea is to serve the community for the next decade and make PGXN and its infrastructure kind of the source of record for extensions for Postgres. So in the past year, I did a bunch of design work on it. Here's a kind of high-level architectural view. We'd have a root registry, which is still the source code distribution stuff. There's a web UX over it that would evolve from the current website. And there's a command line client that knows how to build extensions from the registry. But in addition to those three parts, which we have today, we would all evolve a couple of additional parts. One is interaction, so that when somebody releases a new extension on PGXN, some notifications could go out through webhooks or some sort of queue so that downstream systems like the packaging systems can know something new has come out and maybe automate building and updating their packages. There could be stats and reports, so we can get things like how many downloads there are of these things, what registries, binary registries, make them available, what kinds of reviews, quality metrics can we develop for them and display those on the website. And then ideally a packaging registry of its for PGXN to provide binary packages for all the major platforms of all the extensions it can, to simplify the installation of extensions for anybody who needs to use them, and that if for extensions that aren't available through PGDG, or that if you're not using that system and you want to install extensions. And so the late last year, I was focused on the packaging system and figuring out how to uh, build that. Another part of the changes that went down in the past year was the Extension Ecosystem Summit itself. This was took place at pgconf.dev last May. The idea was for a community of people to come together to collaborate, examine ongoing work in the extension distribution, examine its challenges, identify questions, propose solutions, and agree on directions for execution. So since last year, let's take a look at the topics that we covered last year at the summit. One was extension metadata, where the topics covered included packaging and discoverability, extension development and compatibility, and taxonomies as being important to represent in metadata about extensions, as well as versioning standards. And so one of the outcomes of this was an RFC for version 2 of the PGXN metadata that incorporates, a lot of those needs into a new metadata format that describes extensions more broadly. Another topic was the binary distribution format. What should it look like if we were to have like one kind of major distribution format? We talked about being able to support multiple versions of an extension at one time. There was some talk about the Python wheel format as maybe being a precedent to look at for binary distribution of code. There's also an idea to maybe distribute stuff through Docker containers, also known as the Open Container Initiative. And versioning came up there as well. One of the outcomes of this was another RFC for PGXN about binary distribution, which was inspired by Python wheel, among other stuff. And I wanted to give you a brief demo here of taking the idea of that format. I hacked some changes into the PGXS build makefile stuff to actually have a new command called trunk to build a binary package called a trunk, and upload it to OCI and distribute it there. So here's what it looks like. On my Mac, I was compiling this my semver extension, so you can see there. Then I go into a Linux container and I compile it again for Linux using the make trunk command. And do a typo, exit. So here's what the result looks like now. We have two trunk files, one for PostgreSQL on Darwin and one for PostgreSQL on Linux. There are also some JSON files that are annotations specifically for OCI. And so we have a command where we can actually push these images up into an OCI registry. And then with that registry there, we can then use an install command that knows to download and install the version, the build appropriate for this platform. And then I go into Linux and I do the same thing. Here I'm having to specify the URI explicitly. And it also knows, because of the OCI standard, what the platform is, and so installs the appropriate binary. Another topic was ABI and API compatibility. There was some talk at the summit about what is the definition of an ABI and an API, and how do we define internal APIs and their use. Maybe there's some way to categorize APIs in PostgreSQL for red, green, or in between, something like that. There was desire to have more hooks available into different parts of the system. One of the outcomes of this was I worked with Peter Eisentraut on some stability guidance for the API and ABI that is now committed in the docs. You can read them now on in the developer docs. They'll be part of the Postgres 18 release. The idea there basically being that minor version releases should be safe to use with other minor versions. If you compiled your extension against one minor version, it should be perfectly compatible with other minor versions of the same major release. Now, interestingly, there was a release earlier this year, like 2 weeks after Peter committed this, where there was an API break. It's the first time in like 10 years. And I know Robert Treat, who was in the other session, I don't know if he's here, he and I spent quite a bit of time trying to look for a previous time that happened. And I think there was one around 10 years ago, but then this one happened, and notably it broke the timescale database. And the core decided to release a fix like just a week later, so to restore the ABI compatibility. So it's clear that even though there's this, they're calling it guidance, and they're saying you should in general be able to rely on this. And this was a motivating factor for them to do a quick turnaround on a new release to fix it. There are no guarantees. So another thing that might happen is that I proposed a Google Summer of Code project to build an ABI checker surface. Um, Peter, oh damn it, the other Peter, Scottish Peter.
Gagan.
Thank you, Peter Gagan.
And
Uh,
Irish, but like, what's the diff?
oh no, uh, I'm a terrible person. Sorry, Peter. Um, He POC'd one of these last year, or maybe earlier, I think early in 2024. The project is to like take this work Peter did and actually build something that could potentially run on every commit or push to the back branches of the project. And maybe they would be integrated into the build farm so that if there's a back patch to an earlier branch and it turns red, they know quickly, like, oh, we broke the API. And that would really potentially help provide a higher level of guarantee, even if they don't end up using the word guarantee, about the stability of the APIs and APIs. So I'm hoping that happens. There have been a number of people who've asked, and I know there's at least one guy who's written an application. Another topic at the summit last year was including or excluding extensions in core. They've talked about when to add something to core, to when to remove something from core, whether items in contrib should actually be moved into core itself, so they're not part of contrib in the core distribution. Uh, whether they can move metadata about extensions into the catalog. And again, multiple versions came up. This is perennial challenge. I'm not aware of much work on these questions, so I'm wondering if it's time for a revisit. Uh, as a bonus item, this wasn't a formal topic uh, at the summit last year, but it came up many times in the mini summits, and this is the challenge of packaging and lookup. There's only one path to extensions in ShareDir, and this creates a number of difficulties. So Christoph Berg had a patch for PGDG and Debian that would actually add a second directory. This allowed the PGDG stuff to actually run tests against extensions without changing the core installation of Postgres service itself. Another one is cloud native Postgres immutability. If that directory is, excuse me, part of the image for your cloud native Postgres, you can't actually install extensions into it. A similar issue for Postgres app immutability. Postgres app is a Mac app, and it's signed by a key provided or certificate provided by Apple. But that means that if you install an extension in its shader, you have actually changed the signature of the application and it won't start. And they work around this through a number of symlink shenanigans and stuff like that. But these issues could really be solved by allowing extensions to be installed in multiple locations. So starting with Christoph's search path patch and a number of discussions we had at PGConf last year, Peter Eisentraut has been working on a search path patch, formerly to go in the core, that would work similar to shared preload libraries, but is for finding extension control files. And this would allow you to have them in multiple directories, and we'll find it in the path. Another interesting development in this line has been the Cloud Native Postgres project has been using that extension search path patch to prototype a new feature coming to Kubernetes that allows one to mount a volume that's actually another Docker image. And if you have your extension distributed as an OCI image, you can specify that it be mounted and installed via your CMPG cluster configuration. And that means when CMPG spins up, it puts the extension in the right place, it updates the search path variables, and stuff just works. So a lot of the thought about the stuff went into a less formal RFC I wrote up in my blog rather than on PGXN about extension packaging. Look at the idea there is to take these improvements and actually try to more formalize the organization of extensions separate from how Postgres organizes its shared libraries and shared files. So as I said, we're bringing the Extension Summit back. There will be another Extension Summit hosted by your team here of organizers, myself, Floor, Keith Fisk from Crunchy Data, and Yuri from Omnigres. There's only one S in Omnigres, isn't there, Yuri? I'm sorry about that. So that will be on May 13th in the morning at the day before pgconf.dev. It's one of the sessions at pgconf.dev, and we appreciate their support in that and in these mini summits. The idea of these mini summits is kind of bring up a number of topics of interest, have somebody come and do a 20 or 40-minute talk about it, and then we can have discussion about applications of that. Flora went over the schedule. Peter is going to come next week, Eisentraut, to talk about that extension search path patch that he's been working on and been getting some other contributors on lately. Christoph, who I believe is here, is going to talk about how extensions are packaged in the apt repository. And Gabriele Bartolini from Cloud Native Postgres is going to talk about that mounting extensions stuff that he's been prototyping, as well as the user point of view. And there's one other I think I'm forgetting. I had a slide in here originally. But anyway, the Floor.
I wanted to say Cloud Native PG, Gabriele.
Yeah, Gabriele. So the idea again is, what are your interests in extensions and how they can be improved? There are a lot of potential topics to talk about at the summit or at these mini summits. Development tools, canonical registry, how easy it is to publish, continuous delivery, yada, 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 security scanning, all sorts of stuff that could go into conceiving, designing, developing, distributing extensions for Postgres. So I hope you all will participate. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me for half an hour. So I'd like to turn it over to discussion if people would like to join in, talk about implications of stuff. Also, we can get to any questions here.
Exactly, and everyone should have permission to speak up if they want to. I think maybe, David, at one point you talked about metadata taxonomy. If you can elaborate on that a little bit? That's Peter's questions. Yet another Peter, by the way.
Let me do this. So one that people told me that they found useful was one provided by Trunk. So it just has these limited number of categories that it provide. So, if you are interested in machine learning stuff, you could go to machine learning stuff and it shows you what extensions are potentially available. They have 237 extensions on Sunk right now. That was basically at PGXN itself. At PGXN, God damn it, X, there we go. Allows arbitrary tagging of stuff. So it builds this little tag cloud here. But if I look at this one here, you can see it has, well, this one has no tags. This one has a bunch of tags. These are arbitrary tags that are applied and stuff. So the current metadata looks like this. So it's just plain JSON. Why is that shrinking? And it's just a list of tags. The new, press these polls. The version 2 meta spec has a bunch of examples in it. It's an evolution of that meta.json. So the idea is that you can have a classifications that includes tags as before, but also adds categories, which are a limited list that is would be controlled by the core registry. Yeah, you all saw that, right?
We did.
Yes. Yes, Peter, I'm sorry. Yuri, I'm sorry. I have no idea how I got that extra S in there. My apologies. Yeah, sure. Thanks for remembering people's names. I'm so bad at it.
It's okay. I
Uh,
built a whole career on it. Any other questions, comments? Those are welcome too.
Yes, I'm looking for more of the application since I'm really probably over my head in this group. But like I looked up Mooncake and it's basically it turns out it's an integration with DuckDB and
right.
setting up the columnar format. I went to the GitHub while you were paying attention, but looking and I'm looking how I can integrate it. Like I'm thinking about like I want to use 17.4 as a starting point going forward for me, and maybe using this for especially for the column store indexes, which it's supporting, which is I'm familiar with in SQL Server, which was part of the Vertipack engine. So,
Mm.
so you have virtual cubes that way, and I'm assuming that's the same thing that's happening here.
It has been a lot of activity around DuckDB. I'm aware of like 3 or 4 different extensions that use its library, use its Rust libraries. There's pgDuckDB, there's DuckDB FTW, there's PG Analytics from ArrayDB, and now Mooncake. A lot of activity there. Very interesting.
Because it's really simple. I mean, I actually converted a, a data warehouse in SQL Server with 28 tables, maybe 2 million rows, and it took in Python 17 seconds
Nice.
because I used a Parquet file as an intermediary and then loaded it directly as in a columnar format.
Right. I think DuckDB can read Parquet files directly,
Yeah, it can read
natively.
everything directly. You
Yeah.
know, it's pretty cool. Yeah, it'll actually dynamically create the table for you from
Right.
the whatever the file format that you're giving it.
Right.
So I'm looking at it as a tool for your college to teach the students.
So, what other stuff you all got that's interest you about extension development? Christoph and Yuri in particular. I hope I didn't misrepresent any of the stuff you all have worked on. Thanks, Christoph.
All right. I mean, Yuri is saying slash threatening that he has a lot to say. So let's go.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a place where I can speak without being interrupted by my 3-year-old. Just running around the house, and let's see if this will work. As I went to her bedroom and she's not there. So let's see if I can do this. Can you see me? I think
Yes.
you can.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to make a bunch of announcements that are related to the state of the ecosystem, and I think some people would be interested. So let's start in arbitrary order. There is a new library that we have been developing here at Omnigress, and it basically allows you to develop Postgres extensions in C++. Kind of a sweet spot between C and Rust in a sense. That is, you don't need a different compiler tool chain. You still use the same, GCC or Clang. It's right there, and obviously your integration with C is a little more direct. Let's put it this way. And so it has some interesting capabilities. So for people who are interested in developing extensions in C++ and gaining the benefits of that and not having to do all the tedious things that we have to do with C extensions, look for CPPGress. So I just posted a link to the chat. So basically, C++ for Postgres, I guess. It's still pretty new, but it's already been proven in its initial state, and I think within a couple of months it will reach parity with PGRX, and it already has some features that PGRX does not have. So kind of interesting development. I will probably be speaking about it later this year at some events at least. There's going to be another. No.
I was just going to ask a couple questions about that.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like it would work more closely to the way PGXS and C works, whereas PGRX has like all these additional Rust crates you have to load like slow compile times and all these dependencies. This is just like a layer over the C stuff, an evolution of that.
It's essentially a header-only library, so it's a very common thing in C++ world. So you don't have to build anything, and you just include a file. And in fact, the way I use it, I amalgamate all the header files that we have there into one. So whenever I include it in the project, I just copy the amalgamation, and it's just one file. That's all it is. And so you don't have any other build chain associated. Yet you gain a lot of benefits, from all the features that C++ has. I will not even try to go there because there's a lot that you can actually gain by doing that. But suffice to say, it actually type checks all your functions in runtime. That is, basically converts the types and it actually looks up what's the type passed. If type is not available, it will actually go to syscache, check whether the function is actually matching the signature that you've declared. A lot of safety is there. There's SPI stuff that works the same way, type checks in and out. It can even convert your results to structures. So for example, you request something where you have like an integer and a string or something like that, and you have a structure that matches that. It can automatically derive all of that stuff. So you're never like, is it the first one? Is it the second one? You actually can address them by name. So a lot of really nice benefits that I don't think any library has. Like PGRX certainly requires a lot of work there to be able to do something like that. But yeah, it is much closer to to Postgres itself because it's basically just sitting on top of it, and we verify that even though we're consuming the header files of Postgres through C++, we actually do have a script in our build chain running every time, ensuring that the basically the layout and the size of every structure is the same. And, that guarantees basically we're not addressing incorrectly or, allocating something that is inappropriately sized. So good results from that. And obviously you don't need to bring a new tool chain to the game. So it's a lot easier. Right. It is C++20, which some people consider new, but by the time it's mature, it's already kind of 5 years old, and most compilers do support it, and they have decent support of C++20 with few exclusions, but those are relatively minor. So for that reason, it's not C++23, for example, because it's not very well supported across compilers, but C++20 is. So that's a very interesting development that allows us to start moving a lot faster, and we're hoping others can do that as well and avoid all the safety problems. Like, for example, in C, it's very common that you'll do SPI call, but you don't actually check what's the type of the return value, and you have one expectation, but it's something else, and things can go really wrong with that. All the way to segfaults, obviously. So yeah, that's one announcement. The other one is, I briefly mentioned that on the channel, I'm going to be doing a talk about PostgreSQL next week in Orlando. I will be sharing slides after the talk as well. Basically, the idea there is, instead of inventing a completely new package managing sort of system with its own format, it's a system that takes a lot of heuristics, takes the URLs of packages and of extensions in, and creates packages for different outputs, like for Red Hat, for Debian, perhaps for some other formats in the future, like OCI. And it basically focuses on the idea that a lot of things can be figured out. So, for example, do we have a new version? Well, we can look at list of tags in the Git repo. Very commonly, that works for, say, 80% of extensions. Do we need a C compiler? Well, we can see whether we have C files. Do we need a C++ compiler? We can look to see if there are any C++ files, Rust, etc. So basically, we can figure out a lot of stuff without packagers having to specify that manually every time they have a new extension. And they don't have to repackage every time there is a new release, because we can actually detect new releases and try to build. So I'm going to be talking a lot about topics related to sort of this cross-packaging and detection of common behaviors, and also what are the challenges with the way, say, PGDG packages extensions, especially when it comes to multi-versioning. So I think it's going to be a very interesting talk, and that's basically next week. So that's second announcement. And the third announcement, myself and a few other people, we're also running an event that is not affiliated with pgconf.dev, but is strategically scheduled to happen one day before pgconf.dev, and that's Postgres Extensions Day 2025. The website is pgx.day. And basically, the idea is that there will be content, so it's not a non-conference type of event. It's going to be presentations and discussions around them. We're soliciting speakers still. So the call for speakers is open until April 1st. That's not a joke. It is, but we're going and basically talking to every extension author we can reach and see what they have. There's also an option for people who cannot or would not come to Montreal this year to submit a pre-recorded talk. So basically, if they have something to share, the point of the event is not just to bring people together, but also surface content that can be interesting to other people. And so if we can surface it in a digital form, that's great too. So we're obviously hoping people will submit even more presentations for us to consider and for us to share with others. And the conference event itself is free. So we obviously recognize that people already pay quite a bit of money to attend the big event in Montreal. So we essentially made it free. So those are 3 announcements that I was interested to make. Happy to answer questions as well.
Good stuff. Yeah,
Anyone else has any announcements to make while we're at it, you know?
I extended my trip to Montreal to be a day earlier so I can make it a PGX day. So I plan to be there.
You said you are planning to be there, right?
I am, yes.
I'm hoping you will submit a talk too.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. No.
2 talks today. I'm like, nah, I'm not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
All right.
So what's in 2 weeks we have Peter Eisentraut talking about the search path patch, yes?
Yes. Do you want me to share the link from the meetup
Yeah.
group, maybe?
Yeah.
Let me do that real quick. I will just share the specific events, but of course we have 5 or now 4, I guess, more of these planned. So definitely sign up for that one as well. And what will happen next is we're downloading this thing, making sure that all of the closed captions make sense, and we'll upload it to YouTube for you to enjoy later. And hopefully until the next one.
Yep. And hopefully we'll see some of you in Montreal as well.
That's good. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.